Today, with Hashem's help, we will complete chapter 13 in Tanya. We are discussing various levels of Banani. We've discovered a few. We have discovered a Banani who has the voice of his Yetzer Hara literally in his head. And we said that if Hashem didn't help this Banani, he could never maintain his status as a Banani. We described that at great length in a very fun discussion, I thought, in the previous lesson. Now we have a second Banani. That Banani is one who is capable, by the nature of the way that Hashem created humans, to help mind over heart avoid any voice of the Yetzer Hara flying into his head. And how has Hashem helped that Banani? By giving humans the nature that the mind rules over the heart. Simple. So he's conducting the affairs of his mind and he's in control. Beautiful. Then you have a Banani who learns Torah all day long, and that's his passion, and he's not interested in anything else. And that Banani might think that he has overcome his Yetzer Hara because the Yetzer Hara never comes into his mind. Well, he should not assume that he is a tzaddik, that he has no Yetzer Hara, because the Yetzer Hara is merely pushed out by his Torah study and by his occupation with holy things. And then you have a fourth level of Banani, and that is a Banani who is on the level of davening all day long. What is the level of davening for a Banani? So we've described right at the beginning of our discussion about the Banani that the Banani is capable through his mind, by the power of his contemplation and what people call meditation. We're not calling it that. Deeply thinking for long periods of time, as much as a person can stand it. Thinking deeply about the greatness of Hashem, generating appreciation for the greatness of Hashem, generating a feeling of longing and for closeness with Hashem. That is the experience of davening. So when a Banani is on the level of davening, he sends his Yetzer Hara into a comatose state, like a person that's in a deep sleep. There is no stirring, there is no pushing, there is no arguing. Everything is fine. Everything just is the way that it should be. And that Banani could think that he has reached the level of tzaddik. But that Banani also should not assume that he's reached the level of tzaddik. Because the risk in having the Banani assume that he has reached the level of tzaddik is that the Yetzer Hara will wake up suddenly. As soon as the mind of that tzaddik relaxes from his occupation with Hashem and the greatness of Hashem, that Banani will, the Yetzer Hara in him will wake up suddenly and cause that Banani to fall. This is the level of Banani that Rabbi thought he was on. Rabbi assumed, since he is always occupied with davening and reaching out to Hashem, and even his Torah study, I believe Rabbi Silverberg, in his lesson on this chapter, makes this distinction. Most of us, when we are studying Torah, we're occupied with the thoughts of Torah. We are excited by the ideas, we're inspired by the themes, but during the actual study of Torah, we're not thinking about Hashem himself. That's why, according to the Alter Rebbe, every once in a while you have to pause and think about Hashem himself. By most people, you don't have that. By most people, the Torah study is not about a bond with Hashem, it's about understanding themes, it's about understanding ideas. But by a tzaddik, studying Torah is like davening. For some people, studying Torah is all about Hashem. You read the page and you're building a bond, a connection with Hashem. So Rabbi was on such a level that his Torah study inflamed his love for Hashem. And therefore, he felt like he could be a Banani that was always on the level of tzaddik. Let me rephrase that. He felt that he was a Banani who was always after davening, or who was always in the middle of davening. He was always focused on inflaming, arousing a feeling of love for Hashem, and that's why his Yetzer Hara never bothered him. So therefore, he called himself like, I am a Banani. And as we've repeated already 3-4 times, the Alter Rebbe told the Chassid there are some 400 levels of Banani. And of course, that's in a general sense. Every Banani, every human being who will lift themselves to the level of Banani will have their own unique level. But there are 400 categories of exactly how it's balanced and exactly what is the internal dynamic in the life of that Banani. Now, if the tzaddik serves Hashem with no Yetzer Hara, that means his mind and his heart, they are incapable of entertaining any interest in anything other than Hashem and his service. Whereas the Banani is capable of serving Hashem with tremendous devotion and correct behavior, but is not ever truly free from the influence of the Yetzer Hara. So this leads us to the following interesting conversation about personal truths. We know that in some arenas of thought, of law, Torah does not accept personal truths. Logic doesn't accept personal truths. Why? Because truth, by its nature, has to have a sense of eternality, of limitlessness, boundlessness. If it is true, then it must always be true. It's true for me. It's true for me simply means I agree with it. I agree with it deeply. I agree with it to the core of my being. That's subjective. That's not it, that's me. If it is true, it must always be true. In the Hasidus group this morning, we were learning about the earth's power that Hashem has given as a gift to the earth to bring things into existence out of nothing, which is a power that Hashem himself has and that the earth has. And nothing in between. Hashem himself and the earth has that power to produce something out of nothing. What does it look like when Hashem creates something out of nothing? Easy. First there was nothing and now there's something. What does it look like when the earth creates something out of nothing? The earth takes something that is qualitatively insignificant and gives it an eternal cycle of reproduction. How do you take something finite and turn it into infinite? So that is like, it's the opposite of what Hashem did. Hashem took something infinite, his own power, and turned it into something finite, a created world. And the earth takes something finite and turns it into something infinite through the process of reproduction. An example, you plant one apple seed in the ground, as the famous colloquialism goes. The scientists, I don't know if we're picking on scientists. The scientist can tell you how many seeds are in the apple, but only God can tell you how many apples are in the seed. Good? So the earth takes the apple seed, which is finite and qualitatively insignificant, and from it, the earth produces a tree that can give an innumerable and endless amount of fruit, all else being equal. Yeah, if we take away weather conditions and we take away the behavior of the critters that live from and in the trees, a tree should live forever and produce endless fruit. There, the earth reveals a power of infinite reproduction, a measure of infinity in something so minuscule and so finite as to be considered nothing. But only the earth has that power. The stars, the sun, and the moon don't have that power. To reveal in something that by its own nature should not change, should not produce infinite, boundless produce. The earth has the power to reveal that in any given thing, in many given things. Even, and this was the interesting part, even water. Water, says the Rebbe in the Maimer in Shar HaEmunah, from the Mittler Rebbe. Water falls from the heavens. As long as water is in the heavens, it is not growing. It is not accumulating. It is not, what's the word we're looking for? Water in the sky is not replenishing. Where is the replenishment of the water happening? In and on the earth. In and on the earth, the interaction that the water has with the earth causes the replenishing of the waters even in the sky. So again, it's the earth that has been given this gift from Hashem to reveal an eternal cycle of reproduction in physical things, in finite things. And the example brought from the Mishnah, because we always like to tie in the subjects that we learn in Kabbalah and in Hasidus to practical everyday life in the form of halacha, Jewish law. So the example given there is in preparation for purifying a person that has become defiled spiritually by contact with a corpse. You have to prepare a mixture of the ashes of a perfectly red cow called para aduma, and you have to mix it with mayim chayim, waters from a living spring, from a living source. And the Gemara and the Mishnah discusses what is a living source, and the answer is a living source is a spring that doesn't dry up even once in 7 years. Because once in 7 years is, if a spring that dries up once in 7 years is called a spring of false pretenses. Because it's not emes, it's not eternal, it doesn't go on forever. Forever in the case of a spring is 7 years. In the case of avodas Hashem, if we are measuring our service to Hashem by how consistent is our love for Hashem, and that love should consistently be on such an intense level that it should crowd out any other interests, well, if that's how we measure our avodas Hashem, then one might have to say that the avodah of a tzaddik who has rid himself completely of the evil inclination, who has removed from himself and even in some cases converted the evils of the animal soul into servants of Hashem, his love is consistently on such an intense level that there is no evil expressed in his heart at all. He is called the true servant of Hashem. And his service of Hashem is truthful. It is emes. What about the Banani? The Banani who, during davening, his love for Hashem is intense. After davening, his love for Hashem dissipates and he's involved in worldly things. Or even the higher levels of Banani, while he is working, and he works all day, on his avodas Hashem, on his connection to God, his yetzer hara, his inclination towards evil is silenced, but it's always crouched and waiting to recover ground. And he's always subject to that risk. One might be inclined to say that the avodas Hashem of a Banani, even the very best that the average human being can do, the optimal level for an average human being, falls short of truthful, falls short of emes. And when we say truthful, when we say emes, we don't just mean things that are because they are. We're talking about things that no matter which way you look at them, and no matter in which context, they are true. Well, that doesn't feel good to a Banani. To the average human being, we're going to say the very best that you can muster is less than authentic. We've mentioned this also earlier in the lesson, earlier in the learning. What is the greatest insult that one Lubavitcher Chassid can offer his friend in rebuke? To call him a chitzen. Chitzen is a derivative, it's a Yiddishism that's derived from the Hebrew word chitzoin, which means exterior. You serve Hashem only on your exterior, but your heart and your soul and your mind are not aligned with your externals, with your exterior behavior. It's called a chitzen. It means, in one word, inauthentic. And so you can imagine the Talmidim of the Alter Rebbe, author of the Tanya. Their preoccupation was to serve Hashem with all their heart, with all their soul, and with all of their emes, with absolute authenticity. And that is a discussion that went around at the Farbrengens in that generation and in every subsequent generation of Hasidim. To the point where a person came to the Alter Rebbe and accused, saying to the Alter Rebbe, your Hasidim are inauthentic. And the Alter Rebbe's response was, based on the halacha, that if a person, God forbid, will pretend to be a cripple during his healthy years, before he leaves this world, he will in fact be a cripple. And the Alter Rebbe said, if that's true in the negative, it must certainly be true many times over for the positive. So let them fake authentic service to Hashem so that before they die, they will in fact reach a level of authentic service to Hashem. But you see the preoccupation with authenticity. So if most of the Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe are striving to be a Banani, are striving to be the optimal human being who's not a tzaddik, but then you tell them the best that you can do is some very organized level of inauthenticity, that's grounds for despair. That's grounds for giving up. Why should I keep trying? If the goal is authenticity and you tell me I can't get there, I will become despondent, I will become depressed, and certainly I'll fall from the level of Banani, even if I try to muster all the strength that I possibly can to continue serving Hashem and doing mitzvahs and avoiding sin. To this question, the Alter Rebbe answers with the following information. We're at the words, V'hine midas ahavazu. Chapter 13. V'hine midas ahavazu ha'amur be'beinani mishas hatfilah. This measure of love that the Banani is capable, the optimal average human being is capable of mustering during his prayers. How does he muster them during his prayers? Al yedei hiskabrus hanefesh ve'elikis chulu, by strengthening his divine soul over the animal soul. When we compare that service, the best that the optimal average human being can muster, compare that to the perfect and complete service, the true service, the true love, the true and all-consuming passion for Hashem that a tzaddik has. Yeah. Ein bechinas ahavazu nikras b'shem avodas emes klal. You're right. You cannot call it truly authentic to any degree. Meyachar, since shechelefes ve'everes acharat tefillah, when the prayers are over, that love that the optimal average human being will muster during his prayers will dissipate and go away. Uchsiv, and we know what the principle about truth, about emes, sfas emes tikein load. How do you know that something is true? If it lasts forever. This is a pasuk from Mishlei. V'yad argia loshen sheker. While the tongue that speaks falsehood will be sustained only for a moment. The word argia, most commentaries connect with the word rega, which means one moment. When you're in Israel and you want to talk to your Israeli friend, but he's in the middle of something, the Israeli friend will say to you, rega. That means just a moment. So, in fact, the Alter Rebbe confirms that when you compare the true service of the tzaddik to the best that could be mustered by the optimal average human being, yeah, you wouldn't say that the best for the average human being is actually authentic at all. V'yafal pikein, but still, says the Alter Rebbe, don't lose hope. Legabe madregas habeinanim nikras avodah tama. For the average human being, if the average human being could muster the level, could achieve the level of a Banani, that is avodah tama. That is a perfect service. Or another way to translate it is a complete service. Be'emes la'amitoi shelahem, according to the authenticity that they are capable of. The Alter Rebbe is saying that different humans have different authenticities. Different humans have different truths. He's going to have to explain this for us, and we're going to listen very carefully. Ish kifi madregasai. Each person according to their level, meaning according to their soul's level, according to their natural ability, according to their intellectual prowess, and according to their spiritual talents. Each Banani, among the levels of Bananim, each one will have their own degree of authenticity. The love that the Banani can muster during prayer. I, the Alter Rebbe, refers to himself saying, I do consider the love that the average human being can muster during prayer authentic. And I would apply to it the principle of true words last forever, the quote from Mishlei that we brought before. Why would the Alter Rebbe apply that principle to a love that ebbs and flows, to a love that rises and falls, to a love that comes and goes? Hoyil, that's because ubekoyach nafsham ho'elikis, the Banani, the average human being who has worked, who has toiled, who has found the path towards passionate love for Hashem, he has empowered his divine soul, lachazor, to go back, ula'oirer b'chinasaha vazu, and to re-arouse this level of love for Hashem, le'olam, forever. That means, although it does ebb and flow, although it does come and go, the fact that the Banani is capable of re-attaining or attaining again that same level of intense love for Hashem means that it has been permanently imprinted on his heart and on his mind. So it's not always expressed as a tangible emotion. That does not take away from the fact that there has been a permanent and indelible imprint on the inner workings, on the internal dynamic of this Banani. And when does the Banani achieve this? Each and every day, when he empowers his Yetzer HaTov, his godly soul, again during the time of prayer. By preparing him or herself with the appropriate preparation, and the appropriate preparation is measured according to the level and capacity of each individual Banani. Key, how can we call this authentic? Some Borscht Belt humor to get us in the mood. A couple visits the rabbi for counseling, and the rabbi listens to the man's side and says, "You're right." And then the rabbi listens to the wife's side and says, "You're right." And then the Rebbitzin comes in and says, "How can they both be right?" And the rabbi says, "You're right." If the tzaddik's level is authentic and true, and truth has to be true in every context, how can the Banani's level be considered true? Is the Alter Rebbe just saying to the tzaddik, "You're right," and to the Banani, "You're right," and to those of us studying and asking this question, "You're also right"? Is this what the Alter Rebbe is doing? Definitely not. Because it would be untrue. How would you solve a problem of authenticity by saying something inauthentic? My father tells a story about Rabbi that one time he summoned a wealthy man to his office, and the wealthy man took off time from work and stood at attention in Rabbi Yitzchak's office. And Rabbi Yitzchak didn't say anything to him. And he stood there for a while until finally he said, "Excuse me, Rebbe, I'm here. I have my business is waiting for me. I can't neglect it for too long. Does the Rebbe have something he wants from me?" And Rabbi Yitzchak says, "You know what? I have a mitzvah to rebuke my fellow Jew, but the mitzvah only applies if I think that the fellow Jew would listen to me." And the businessman said, "Rebbe, if you told me anything, of course I would listen." So Rabbi Yitzchak says, "Oh, in that case, your brother has to marry off his daughter and he can't afford it. So pay for your brother's wedding and give your niece a nice dowry." The man says, "Of course, no problem." And he does what the Rebbe had asked. And when telling that story, my father is quick to point out that this is not a game that Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchever was playing. It wasn't a trap and it wasn't a setup. Every aspect of the interaction was absolutely authentic. Rabbi Yitzchak called the man to his office because he needed to find a way for the brother to pay for his niece's wedding and dowry. When the man came, Rabbi Yitzchak could not find a way to approach the subject and therefore did not approach the subject. When the man asked Rebbe, "Why am I here?" Rabbi Yitzchak said, "In all honesty, I have something to rebuke you about, but I'm not sure you can listen, and therefore I cannot fulfill my obligation." And he said so authentically. And when the man said earnestly, "Whatever you tell me, Rebbe, I'll do," then Rabbi Yitzchak said, "Okay, this is what I brought you here for. This is what I need. This is what your brother needs. This is what your niece needs." Every part of it is authentic. So this is what we're learning here in the Alter Rebbe's Tanya. The Alter Rebbe was a good friend and a mechutin with Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchever. They're honest, they're earnest words, they're authentic words. How can we say about the level of Banani that it is equally authentic? Or are we saying that it's equally authentic? Or are we saying something else? What are we saying? To answer this question, you have to look all the way to the depths of the nature of emes. What is this emes thing that we keep talking about? The thing that in English we call so feebly truth. And we're supporting with the term authenticity. What is it? So let's learn. Ki, hine midas emes. What is this attribute called emes? Hi midas shel Yaakov, is represented by the patriarch Yaakov Avinu. What do we know about Yaakov Avinu? Of the three patriarchs, Yaakov is the one whose progeny was intact. Avraham, who embodied kindness, had one righteous son and one wayward son. Yitzchak, who embodied severity, had one righteous son and one wayward son. Yaakov had 12 sons and a daughter. All of them struggled mightily to stay on the straight and narrow, and by the end of their lives, they were all righteous. Because Yaakov embodies the attribute of truth, a blend between severity and kindness, generosity and discipline. And that's why only about Yaakov it says, Yaakov Avinu lo imes. Yaakov Avinu never dies. Meaning emes, under all contexts, is emes. The role that Yaakov Avinu played and the midah that he implanted in the Jewish people is to give the Jewish people their eternal existence. Never to be torn asunder, never to be destroyed. That midah comes from Yaakov. And we survive till this day because Yaakov Avinu lo imes. Because Yaakov Avinu's approach in serving Hashem imbued the nation that he raised with the power of infinite survival, of eternal survival. Yeah. This midah is also represented in a physical sense in the Beis HaMikdash, in the Mishkan, the traveling temple in the wilderness, by the following piece of hardware. In the walls of the Mishkan were made from wooden beams, and the wooden beams were held together by poles. And each wall had 3 loops for the poles. 2 loops on the outside, on the exterior, one at the top and one at the bottom. And 1 pole would be inserted at the center of the height, mid-height, midway up the top of the pole, in the center. Does that make any sense to you? Yeah? So if the beam is 10 amos tall, 15 feet tall, then 7.5 feet down, right at the center of the thickness of the beam, there is a hole that was bored through. Each and every beam had the same hole in the same place, and you would slide a pole into this hole, and that pole would go from one end of the Mishkan to the other. Combining all the beams together, bringing the wall all together. That's called B'riach hatichoin hamavriach min hakotze el hakotze. That is the pole that went in the center from one end to the other. What does it mean from one end to the other? So the Chachamim explain that on all the other walls you had, let's see, for the exterior hardware, you had 6 different poles. 2 poles for the wall that was on the south, 2 poles for the wall that was on the north, and 2 poles for the wall that was on the west. But for the pole that went through the center, it was 1 long pole that miraculously Hashem caused that you put it in and it turned at the corners. The pole bent at the corner, so that it was a single pole holding together all the 3 walls of this traveling Mishkan. the northern, western, and southern walls of the Mishkan were held together by a single pole that ran through the center. Why is this pole possible, capable of running through the center and turning at the corners and holding together the north, the west, and the southern walls? Because it is in the center, and the center is the point of truth. This is a physical representation of the spark of truth, the midas ha'emes, that goes from the highest spiritual level to the very lowest spiritual level. In the words of Tanya, Meiroim ha'mailos umadregos ad seif kol dargin, from the very highest spiritual expressions of holiness to the very, very lowest degrees of concealment and symptom. Ubechol mailu madrega. Now, think about this. At every level and at every stage, maveriach toich nekuda ha'emtsois. This center pole would run through the core and center, the point of truth at every level. Shehi nekudas ubechinas midas emes shalom, which is, for every level, its individual point of absolute truth. Umidas emes hi nachla bli meitzarim. Truth is capable of being present at every level because truth is in every context true. That doesn't mean that the context has no influence on that truth. In every context, truth is present. And based on the context, truth plays its role. Ve'ein la shiur, it's capable of being present at every level. It has no limit of how high in the expressions of godliness it can be present, and it has no boundaries as to how low into the concealment and restraint of Hashem's creation it can be present. That's the nature of truth. Before we translate this into the analog, into the lesson for how a Banani should feel about his avodah, let's make sure we understand this properly. What we know about this process of creation is, that Hashem is at the core of every layer. How is Hashem present at the core of every layer? So we have discussed this many times, and we don't want to get lost in the discussion. We just want to make it clear for us in this context to understand what the Alter Rebbe is telling us. Hashem is present at every level because Hashem is not bound by any scale, by any measurement, by any definition. And therefore, no definition requires that Hashem not be present. The only one that confuses people is finity and infinity. If the created world is finite, how can Hashem, the infinite, be present as well inside the finite world? And the answer is, that's a misnomer. That's not correct. Hashem is not infinite. Hashem is carefully described by the Torah as not finite. Hashem is not bound on any. Hashem is not to be found on any. Hashem is not to be found anywhere on the scale of finity versus infinity, because that also is a scale. He is not finite. He's also not bound to infinity. Hashem is not subject to any of the scales that he created. And therefore there is no scale, there is no boundary, there is no definition that requires that Hashem not be present. And therefore Hashem is present everywhere. But that presence is not one that is received and contained by the creation. Rather, it's one that exists in an offset state without any awareness of the creation. Does that make sense? Hashem is here and you can't know it. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere, and you don't know it. If you didn't read it in the Torah, you wouldn't sense it. You don't sense it at all, and if it wasn't written in the Torah, you wouldn't know it. That is not called being present in creation, because it's not in. Hashem is present everywhere equally, but that is not called present in creation. Therefore, Hashem condensed his light, condensed his presence, and created or emanated a form of his light, a form of his presence that can be in the creation present at every level. And that's called Shechina, that's called Malchus. That's generally how it's known. But if you dig a little deeper, you'll see that just like the physical world has its spiritual epicenter in the Holy of Holies on the Temple Mount, the Beis HaMikdash, so too every created level has its spiritual epicenter in its Beis HaMikdash with its Holy of Holies. What is the Beis HaMikdash of every level? The Beis HaMikdash of every level are the 10 divine powers: Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus, that make up the spiritual spinal cord of every level of existence. And every one of the innumerable levels of existence has this Beis HaMikdash of the 10 divine powers in it. And at the core of each one of these, there is a center pole. And that center pole extends from the very, very highest expressions of godliness all the way into the deepest concealment. And if you can picture the tree of life with Chachma on the right, Bina on the left, Das in the middle, Chesed on the right, Gvura on the left, Tiferes in the middle, you'll see that only the center beam runs from before the first level until after the lowest level. The center beam starts in Keser. Keser is a fancy way of saying Hashem himself. And it reaches all the way till Malchus. Malchus is a fancy way of saying the deepest, darkest concealment, aka this physical world. That center beam is personified by among the patriarchs by Yaakov Avinu, specifically the Midas Hatiferes. While the right column is personified by Avraham Avinu, and the left column is personified by Yitzchak. Yaakov's Midah reaches from the top till the bottom, and at every level, it takes a slightly different form. And the only reason that the right column and the left column can continue to evolve and continue to exist is because you have that center column that stands so firmly rooted in the beginning and so firmly rooted in the end. Another way to say it is, it's only because you have the center column that is so firmly rooted in the intention and then also so firmly rooted in the outcome. That's the only reason why Chesed has any existence and why Gvura has any existence. That's the only reason why Avraham Avinu is there and why Yitzchak Avinu is there. Because Yaakov Avinu is there. And Yaakov Avinu is the foundation upon which they are built, because he has the staying power to go on forever. Not to be torn asunder, not to be destroyed. not to produce anything wayward. Now, because they are on different levels, because there are so many different levels in existence, therefore, every iteration of truth is in response to its context. How is that described in Kabbalah? Let's take a look. Every time a new level or layer is produced below, they are as nothing, qualitatively insignificant to the level that is above them. As is well known to those who have studied Kabbalah and the deepest parts of Hasidus, that the highest on any given level, you have the macro and the micro. In each individual level, on the micro level, you have levels, you have items, you have people, angels, souls, higher and lower, greater and smaller in each individual level. The highest of each individual level, the very, very highest that you would call the head and the beginning, is qualitatively insignificant as to be considered as nothing when compared to the very, very lowest of any level above it. How does this translate into Avodas Hashem? How does that translate into the comparison between tzaddikim and beinonim? The tzaddik's truth is true on the tzaddik's level, meaning the tzaddik, because of his hard work, has reached a level of Avodas Hashem that can be called authentic. Nothing more can be achieved on his level. He has reached the center, the core of his spiritual being and activated it in the service of Hashem. The Banani, the optimal average human being, because of his hard work, has reached the core, the center of his spiritual being and activated it. There is nothing more that he could accomplish on his level, because his level has its unique limitations. Rav Chaim Vital, in the Sha'ar HaKedusha, describes the soul of man as a sphere with layers. The example that I can think of is an onion. Layers, layer on top of layer on top of layer on top of layer, and every time you peel away a layer, another layer appears. Or for those that have young kids the last 10, 15 years, those giant jawbreakers that the kids eat and lick away one layer at a time for weeks. Layer after layer after layer. A person who is worthy peels away a layer of crassness from his soul and activates a deeper part of himself. If he's worthy further, then Hashem will bless him to peel away another layer of crassness from his soul, deeper and deeper and deeper, until he reaches the center, the core of his spiritual life. But each person, in the context in which Hashem created them, has a certain limitation, is rooted, is planted, or grows, sprouts from a certain level in the very long chain of levels of spiritual expression, of divine expression from Hashem. And based on that place in the chain where your soul springs from, that is your spiritual limit. You couldn't go higher than that without a miracle. So a human being who has, through hard work, peeled away layer after layer after layer until they have reached the very center and core of their spiritual being, that is authentic, even though in practice they appear to be very different experiences. The tzaddik lives with no inclination to do evil, and the Banani lives in constant, perpetual struggle against exactly that inclination. Says the Alter Rebbe, but if you understand the inner workings of the spiritual inner workings of the world, and the spiritual inner workings of a human being, you'll know that a person that has worked hard and achieved their optimal level, the highest and best that they can possibly achieve according to their intellectual, emotional, and spiritual capacity, has reached the point of truth in their own context. Therefore, says the Alter Rebbe, to any Banani who has worked, has struggled, and has achieved that level, Mazel Tov, you have served Hashem authentically. And that's worthy of tremendous celebration.